Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Cultivating Classics, Did They Teach Us? And I'm your host, Miles Minton. On this podcast, I'll discuss popular children's television shows from the late 80s, 90s, and 2000s, along with my memories of them, some cool and interesting facts about them, and analyze their educational value. Every once in a while, I will have a guest on to share their experiences with the show and give their 2 cents on whether they believe the show is educational or not. Now, let's jump right into the episode. Today's topic is a show that I have very fond memories of, even if they aren't the clearest because of how young I was when watching the show. I'm talking about the show, Bear in the Big Blue House.
Welcome to the Blue House.
Hello, I'm the small mouse.
Things to do.
Fun for you.
Howdy from the big bear. Want some fun?
Here's where.
Just for you.
All is new in the House of Blue.
In case you never heard of Bear in the Big Blue House, I'm here to fill you in. Firstly, it was a show produced by the Jim Henson Company and created by Mitchell Kriegman that aired in completion from October 20th, 1997 to April 28th, 2006. More on what I mean by incompletion later. Anyways, the show aired on Playhouse Disney as a part of its preschool television block. The premise of the show is that Bear, the titular character, lives in a big blue house in a town called Woodland Valley. Along with Bear, a handful of young animal children stay in or frequently visit his house and have adventures within or around it. The children consist of Tutter, Ojo, Trilo, Pip, and Pop. There is also a living shadow girl named Shadow, because why not? Each episode is different and follows varying topics, themes, or events, such as sharing, what it means to be family, or Thanksgiving. The setting also changes occasionally, showcasing more of Woodland Valley, with places such as the local library, cinema, post office, and doctor's office. Each episode opens with an intro song, either Welcome to the Blue House from 1997 to 2002, which is the song you heard earlier, or Welcome to Woodland Valley from 2002 to 2006. Near the end of the episode, Bear and Luna, the moon, would sing the goodbye song to end it off, and then an instrumental version of whatever the intro was plays over the credits. Beyond these songs, the show has many musical numbers throughout its entire run that really made the show a standout, despite many children's shows at the time having music in it. This music was made possible by the wonderful composing and writing team of Mitchell Kriegman, Peter Lurr, Brian Woodbury, David Yazbek, Bill Obrecht, and Julian Harris. Now, growing up with this show, it was very visually appealing to look at, with just so many bright colors and interesting creatures, even if the creatures themselves don't look accurate to what they do in real life. It was just a puppet show that was meant to entertain and educate children on a variety of topics. And I have very fond memories of watching this show before going to school early in the morning on Playhouse Disney. And I never really caught every episode, but I caught enough of it to be engaged with it enough to want to see more. And I think that is a good marker of a good show. Other than Sesame Street, which I grew up with, this might be the only other big puppet show that I watched when I was younger. I didn't grow up watching The Muppets or Fraggle Rock or other things like that. So this was my introduction to a kind of kids puppet show, because I think I've seen this before I was watching Sesame Street. And it taught me quite a bit in the little amount of time I would be able to watch the show, about being adventurous and loving the little things in life. And just like I said earlier, there's a lot of music in a lot of children's shows growing up. So I think that helped develop my love of music now, early on. And if you listen to a handful of the songs in the show, there's a lot of jazz influence in it, and I think that is a good way to teach kids early on about that style of music, even if they don't have a name to put to it. Just showing them that style of music early on can influence what they might listen to for the rest of their lives. And who doesn't love jazz, am I right? So to talk about the main characters a little more in depth, you have Bear, obviously the main host and protagonist of the series, who is puppeteered by Noel McNeil. He's very large, brown with like a blue nose, and he acts as a caregiver to the children Pip, Pop, Ojo, Trilo, and Tutter, despite not being related to any of them. And I think they mentioned at a few different parts in various episodes that he's helped to raise these kids since they were babies. So he's very familiar with them, and they're very endeared to him, and vice versa. Then you have Tutter, the light blue mouse, puppeteered by Peter Lenz. Loves cheese. He surprisingly loves doing chores and keeping things organized and clean. He lives in a mouse hole in the kitchen of Bear's house, and he was considered to be the show's breakout character. He was a lot more popular than the creators had expected, and that probably led to him having a lot more focus as a character in the 4th season. Then you have Trilo, who's a white, blue, and green lemur, who's very playful and loves to dance and just always on the go and active, who is puppeteered by Tyler Bunch. I'm not a big fan of Trilo as a character, or at least I don't believe I was, despite his personality being very similar to that of Elmo from Sesame Street, and I loved Elmo growing up. Had a doll of him dressed up in some urban clothes that I got from Build-A-Bear. Trilo seems to also be the youngest of the children, as his behavior tends to reflect, and his speaking patterns make it very hard to understand him at a lot of times. Then you have Ojo, who was puppeteered by Vicky Eibner. Ojo's a female red bear cub who is quite curious, driven, and has a wild imagination. She is also good friends with Trilo. They tend to hang out a lot. Then you have Pip and Pop, who are puppeteered by Peter Lenz and Tyler Bunch. They're 2 purple otter twins who live in the otter pond near the Big Blue House. They often speak simultaneously, saying or singing the same thing in unison or in a 2-part harmony. I wouldn't call their singing very good, but I don't know if it was supposed to be or not. You have Ray the Sun, voiced by Jeffrey Holder, who was a talking sun who would often rise at the beginning of the episodes and sing Good Morning with Bear, starting in season 2. He will also occasionally tell Bear what the weather will be for the day. And his counterpart is Luna the Moon, voiced by Lynn Thigpen first, and then Carol Dennis after Thigpen's unfortunate passing. Luna is a talking moon who appears at the end of every episode to discuss the episode's theme with Bear out on the attic balcony. Sometimes Luna would also provide words of wisdom to Bear and the viewer, depending on what was going on in the episode. And then lastly, out of the main characters, you had Shadow, voiced by Tara Mooney, who was a living shadow girl who was always kind of laughing, telling stories, sometimes sneaking up on Bear to scare him a little bit. She spoke with an Irish accent. My reason for choosing this show to cover on the podcast was I was reminded of it quite recently when I was on Instagram Reels, and I saw a reel of Ojo and Tutter casually cursing at each other in a behind-the-scenes blooper that they did, and it was just so funny and caught me off guard. And it just made me think, I loved this show growing up. Obviously, I didn't do that kind of thing in the show, but just seeing it again reminded me of so many memories I had when I was younger, and I knew I needed to cover this show on the podcast. By the end of the show, there were 4 seasons, consisting of a total of 118 episodes. Some of the major recurring characters that would, be a supporting cast to the main crew were Grandma Flutter, who was the grandmother of Tutter, and Baby Blotter, his little baby cousin. Doc Hogg, a pig who was the local physician. Lois, a blue-footed booby living in the Woodland Valley, working as a local telephone operator. There was a running gag that she usually misheard what everybody was saying to her, which I could think is kind of problematic as a telephone operator. There was Skippy, a blind red squirrel living in Woodland Valley that is good friends with Trilo. You had Otto and Etta, Pip and Pop's grandparents, who ran the Woodland Valley Library. You had Miss Maxwell, the school teacher of the Mouse School, which became a lot more important in the later seasons. And then you had Tutter's classmates at the school, Rita, Keisha, and Moss. Now let's go into fact time. Beyond airing in America, the show also aired in Brazil, Ireland, Canada, Australia, and the UK. Disney bought the Jim Henson Company in February of 2004, gaining the rights to The Muppets and Bear in the Big Blue House, but not Sesame Street or Fraggle Rock. The top 5 episodes, according to IMDb, are as follows. This Is Your Life, Bear, which had a 9.2 out of 10, and in it, this is the show's grand finale, and Bear wins a free vacation over the phone, but the young residents of the house misunderstand the situation and think he is leaving them for good, so they do what they can to try to stop him. At number 2, we have Home is Where the Bear Is, at an 8.6 out of 10. This is the very first episode of the show and acts as an introductory to the layout of the Big Blue House and who the main characters are. At number 3, you have Ooh Baby Baby, at an 8.4 out of 10. In this episode, Tutter is tasked with babysitting his younger cousin, Baby Blotter. At number 4, we have When You've Got to Go, which is at 8.2 out of 10. This episode is about using and discussing the bathroom and is essentially a potty training episode for kids. It also reassures kids that accidents can happen and is nothing to feel ashamed of. In my research, I found that this episode almost didn't see the light of day because of fears from a certain exec. You see, as Kriegman tells it, by the time he conceived this episode, the Bear in the Big Blue House was so well respected by executives at Disney Channel, and he was so trusted as a creator that it almost felt like he could pretty much get away with anything. Still, not wanting any backlash from anyone with the creation of this episode, Kriegman continued to check with the upper brass about potentially tackling toilet training in the show. Finally, after the rough cut of the episode had been made, he called upon an executive and insisted that they need to see it first to make sure it was alright to air. Upon seeing it, the executive became very concerned and said that it either couldn't air or that it had to be neutered down so much that it basically wouldn't be what it was. Backed up by his staff and educational experts, Kriegman finally convinced him to at least take the episode to a test market. They did so, and the response was through the roof, by far the greatest they've ever gotten for any episode of the show at the time. The episode went to air with only a couple of minor changes, and the resulting ratings were huge as it became one of the most popular episodes of the show. Lastly, at number 5, we have Halloween Bear, which is a Halloween episode in the show. A lot of kids shows and shows in general have a holiday-based episode, if not multiple. Also, it's rated at 8.1 out of 10. Now, I mentioned earlier that the show in continuation was aired from this time to this time, but it was primarily produced from 1997 to 2003 and went on a hiatus in late 2003. Contrary to a widespread rumor reported in numerous media, the show was not canceled due to the death of Lynn Thigpen. According to Noah McNeil, Thigpen's death occurred after production had already wrapped. The rest of season 4 aired from April 21st, 2006 to April 28th, 2006. Another turbulent tidbit regarding the show is that Noel had also revealed the episode "Into All a Good Night" was supposed to be the grand finale for the series, as they did not think it was going to be renewed. This is why everyone sings the goodbye song at the end, which would have made the show end at the standard 65 episode mark that most kids' shows had back then. However, it wound up getting renewed because it was starting to become more popular among kids, resulting in a third season being produced. During that hiatus period I mentioned earlier, a spin-off titled Breakfast with Bear was made and aired from June 20th, 2005 to September 15th, 2006. Its premise was that in each episode, Bear would visit a different home and follow a child's morning ritual, their hygiene needs, their game playing, the occasional song singing, etc., before enjoying breakfast with them as they prepare for the rest of their day or school. Since this was a series of segments aired between programming, this spin-off was never officially released on any medium. According to McNeil, the show was originally called The Big House, and the titular house in question was alive and could talk. What a very different show that would have been. Lastly, Bear only uses his left arm in the show because the actor's right arm is used to operate Bear's mouth and facial features. Now on to the educational review. At our first category, engagement, or how interesting the show is, I gotta give the show a 5. It's self-explanatory if you've ever seen it, that this show is very engaging, whether it be the plots of each individual episode or just watching it and having you become enwrapped in what's going on, to people probably having a favorite character from the show because of them latching on to their personality or characteristics. It's just a very engaging show, and I have to give it a 5 because I couldn't think of how they could have done anything any better than what they already did. I mean, the ratings speak for themselves. Next, we have the category of interaction, which is the category where I discuss how much the characters in the show interact with the audience members watching it, primarily the kids. And I gotta give that another 5 out of 5. Bear almost constantly is talking to the audience and telling them things, teaching them things, asking them questions, and looking at the camera for one to engage the audience, who, like I said, are the kids in the show, by talking to them, which psychology has shown is a surefire way to keep little kids with developing minds not only engaged, but to get them to actually take in what is being said in the show. Next, we have reflection, which is me talking about how much of what is shown in the show reflects our own reality and what is actually possible. And I'm going to give it a 4.5 because for the most part, whatever is shown in the show is talking about things that happen in real life, whether it be the events, whether it be the places, whether it be the emotions and character growth that some characters go through, whether it be sounds they hear, the visuals of the set on the show reflect actual things in the real world. The only reason I took off 0.5 was because other than clips they'll show of talking to real kids, there aren't any humans in the show living in Woodland Valley. It's all animal characters. And you might, as a young kid, get a little misconstrued about the capabilities of animals rules and who lives where and things like that, but for the most part, they should be fine. But I try to be fair in my ratings. Next, we have positive messaging. I'm gonna give that a 5 out of 5. The show has many lessons, many themes, and morals in it that are great for kids to take in and truly learn from and utilize in their own daily lives. I think that was a big purpose of the show overall, was to be educational and influential in its audience's lives. Lastly, we have visuals. I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5 because, as I touched on earlier, the overall look of the show is very appealing and interesting to watch. It uses a lot of real items in its set of the Big Blue House and other various locations. The puppets are, generally speaking, cute and lovable. They're puppeteered masterfully by the crew. When I was rewatching it in research for this episode, I was noticing just how alive Bear seems to be as he's moving about the place. I noticed how much work went into the set pieces and placement of the puppets to make it feel realistic. And I just gotta give it credit where credit is due. The only thing holding it back, sort of what I'm said in reflection, is that these are animals doing anthropomorphic things, and also the colors of the animals don't always match real life. And while also researching, I looked up some of the other side characters that I didn't mention or did mention, and a few of them are just the animal in real life made into a puppet, which kind of was creepy, but that's just my thoughts on it. So I was thinking maybe a kid might look at it and kind of get weirded out or creeped out about how this suddenly realistic looking animal was being puppeteered. But it's just one point off. Visually, it is still great. And I think if it wasn't so, it wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. So that gives it a total of a 4.7 out of 5, which is basically a 5 out of 5. This is a great all-around show. And with that, I'll wrap up the episode. Thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully I've convinced you that Bear in the Big Blue House was, in retrospect, a really educational show for preschoolers and early elementary schoolers. Earning itself a 5 on my scale, Bear in the Big Blue House is definitely a classic of Playhouse Disney programming. It truly deserved the acclaim it got in its time. If you agree or disagree, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your feedback on the overall episode, your fave memories with or moments from the show, and if you think this show has merit for the current generation. Listeners, have a good day, and I'll be back again soon.